Battle of Hillsbrad foothills, 6 years after the Dark Portal. With Admiral Proudmoore's fleet scattered, the Horde continued to Hillsbrad foothills and made landfall uncontested. The Alliance's defenses were sparse, though the majority of the Alliance forces had reached Hillsbrad. They were in disarray. The Orcish army stormed ashore, but the Red Dragons who guarded the Horde's fleet refused to follow them. Necros had stayed in Grim Patrol to watch over RX'd, and he was not present to give the creatures new commands. He had ordered them only to protect the ships, and they would not kill any more humans than necessary. It was a small act of defiance, but it was all the dragons could do without endangering RX'd. Orgrim did not press the issue. He left the dragons where they were and marched inland. He planned to cross the Alterac mountains to reach Capital City. It would be a difficult journey, but it was the quickest way to strike at Lordaeron. Lothar anticipated this plan. From a military standpoint, Lordaeron's capital was a target that was too good to resist. Its fall would breed division and throw the rest of the Alliance into chaos. Lothar would not let that happen. He arrayed his tired troops across Hillsbrad to bar the northern and western routes to the capital. Lothar then rallied his forces as best he could, but his words had little effect. He could see the fear in their eyes. This was the first time most of the humans had ever seen the hulking orcs. They were things born of nightmare. Fortunately for Lothar, the paladins had finished their training. The Holy Knights rode through the Alliance's lines, their presence filling their fellow soldiers with hope and courage. The Horde's war drum sounded, and the howling mass of green-skinned warriors charged north. They smashed into the human lines with war cries on their lips, an oiled blade in hand. For the first time in history, the full might of the Horde and the Alliance armies clashed. Elaria and her high elf rangers thinned the Horde's ranks with bow and arrow, while Lothar fought beside his paladins. Elsewhere, Khadgar and other magi unleashed their arcane powers on the approaching orcs. The Second War had begun. Amid the fighting, a corrosive fog crept over the battlefield. From the fetid mists, slain human soldiers rose from the dead and then launched themselves at their former comrades. At the head of this unholy army were a handful of hooded figures riding skeletal steeds. The Death Knights had entered the battlefield. They charged through the stunned human army, inflicting pain and terror on their enemies. Orgrim watched the attack with a mix of displeasure and satisfaction. He was still uneasy about the Death Knights, but he now saw just how effective they were in combat. The mere sight of the Death Knights horrified the humans, and the Alliance lines began to crumble. It was then that a blazing white light appeared from Uther, Tyrileon, and the other paladins. Waves of holy energy rippled over the Alliance soldiers, striking down the reanimated human corpses and sweeping away the Death Knight's corruptive fog. The paladins called upon their holy powers to mend wounded soldiers and ease their fearful hearts. Filled with renewed confidence, the Alliance regrouped and slammed down on the Orcish front lines like a hammer. Sporadic battles broke out in Hillsbrad. The Horde and the Alliance were evenly matched, but Doomhammer knew that would not last forever. The longer the orcs stayed in Hillsbrad, the more time the Alliance had to call in reinforcements from their far-flung territories. The human army was protecting the quickest routes to Lordaeron's capital. Doomhammer's only course of action was to go east and find another way to the city. For this, he called on the Amani trolls. They knew the mountain terrain well. The trolls agreed to guide the orcs, but they would not do so until Doomhammer made good on his promise to help them liberate their leader, Sol-Jin. The Amani Pact. Doomhammer had not forgotten his vow to free Warlord Sol-Jin. Orc scouts had discovered the trolls' whereabouts in a prison camp near the human bastion known as Durnhold Keep. As battles continued across Hillsbrad, Doomhammer himself led a raiding party to rescue Sol-Jin. The prison's defenders stood little chance against the war chief and his battle-hardened soldiers. After freeing Sol-Jin, Doomhammer invited him and the rest of his people to join the Horde. At first, Zul'jin balked at the proposal. He was warlord of the Great Amani. He would answer to no one but himself. Doomhammer was quick to allay Zul'jin's fears about leadership. If the Amani pledged themselves to the Horde, they would not become servants. Zul'jin would retain full control over his people. He and Doomhammer would stand as equals against their enemies. Doomhammer finally won Zul'jin's support with an offer. If the Amani committed their forces to the Horde, the orcs would help them annihilate their rivals, the High Elves of Quel'Thalas. Attacking Quel'Thalas meant moving farther north from Lordaeron's capital than Doomhammer wanted. It was a risk, but a necessary one. The battles at Hillsbrad had taught Doomhammer many things about the Alliance. For one, the Paladins were a formidable force, equal to that of the Death Knights. To win, Doomhammer would need the Amani's support. Doomhammer ordered the Horde to turn east. His trusted lieutenant, Varrock Saurfang, commanded a rear guard of Blackrock orcs to waylay the Alliance. This gave the rest of the Horde precious time to cross Hillsbrad and funnel through a narrow mountain pass and into a region known as the Hinterlands. Though the land was rugged, the Horde moved quickly with the help of the Amani guides. The trolls led the orcs on a path that would take them over the northern mountains and into Quel'Thalas. En route, Zul'jin rallied the local Amani trolls to his side. All seemed clear until winged shadows appeared over the Horde. These were not dragons. They were griffins, ridden by the region's fearless wild hammer dwarves. From on high, they rained lightning and thunder upon the Horde. On wings of thunder. The Hinterlands had long been home to the wild hammer dwarves. From their mountain stronghold called Airy Peak, they kept watch over the land. The Wildhammers were a tenacious people famous for their kinship with griffins. Many of these dwarves were adept shaman, and they infused the power of lightning into weapons known as stormhammers. The Wildhammers were also a fiercely independent people. Due to their penchant for isolationism, they knew nothing about the Horde or the battle raging in Hillsbrad. Only when the orcs marched into Hinterlands did the dwarves learn of their existence. The Wildhammer leader, Thane Gul'dan, took action to protect his homeland. He and his bravest griffin riders barreled down from the skies. They bombarded the Horde with their stormhammers and then ascended back into the safety of the clouds. Gul'dan continually launched these devastating strikes and whittled away at the Horde's strength. The only battle-ready dragons currently at the Horde's disposal were guarding its ships in Hillsbrad, and so the orcs had no means of countering the troublesome griffin riders. Doomhammer could not continue north with the dwarves harassing his lines. The war chief led his soldiers in an assault on Airy Peak, forcing Gul'dan and his griffin riders to converge on the capital. As battle erupted outside the city, Orgrim and half of the Horde pulled back. They would continue north while the remainder of their army kept the dwarves occupied. Gul'dan and his forces paid little attention to retreating orcs and trolls. They were concerned only with defending Airy Peak, not with chasing down the rest of the Horde. After Doomhammer slipped north, Lothar and his army arrived in the Hinterlands and came to the Wildhammer clan's aid. The combined might of humans, elves, and dwarves soon pushed the orcs away from Airy Peak and sent them retreating into the forests. The assault on Airy Peak changed Gul'dan and his people. They now knew of the threat posed by the Horde, and they were determined to help defeat the orcs. Gul'dan pledged his clan to the Alliance. The inclusion of the Wildhammers and their griffin riders were a much-needed boon. Though the orcs had not used dragons since the naval battle near Zul'Dare, Lothar feared a day would come when they would return. If the Alliance was to match the Horde's aerial superiority, it would be through the griffin riders. From Gul'dan, the Alliance learned that half of the Horde had slipped north. It was only then that Lothar realized he had been outmaneuvered by Orgrim. The Horde contingent in the Hinterlands was but a portion of the orcs' full strength. It was a bitter revelation, but Lothar did not wallow in defeat. He immediately dispatched Hinterlands and a large part of his armies to track Orgrim down. Meanwhile, the rest of the Alliance remained in the Hinterlands to deal with the Horde there. The other potential routes to Lordaeron's capital seemed secure. The kingdom of Alterac was holding the line to the east. King Perrenhold had set his garrisons to barricade those mountain passes, so if the Horde tried to march on the city through that route, the defenses would slow its approach. Garona's escape. Throughout the Second War, Garona had lived under the watchful eye of Blackrock warrior Alterac. She had served many functions, sometimes translating missives taken from captured Alliance messengers. She had also fought alongside her fellow Horde soldiers. Initially, Garona viewed Alterac as just another mindless warrior, a fanatic who had sworn his life to War Chief Blackhand despite his tyrannical disposition. But over time, she had seen a glimmer of something in the orc, a fading ember of pride and honor. Garona believed she could win Alterac's trust, and she told him everything she knew of Gul'dan and the Shadow Council. She also revealed her knowledge of demons and the true purpose of the Horde. The orcs were merely puppets of a terrible enemy. If the Horde destroyed the Alliance, the demons would transform Azeroth into a wasteland. Alterac treated Garona's words as poisonous lies. After all, she had been Gul'dan's assassin. How could he ever trust someone who had committed such dishonorable acts? After Alterac's rebuke, Garona abandoned any hope of helping him see the truth. She bided her time, patiently awaiting an opportunity to escape her handler. That opportunity finally came in the Hinterlands. As chaos engulfed the region, Garona slipped into the forests and vanished. Alterac considered hunting down the half-orc, but waging war on the Alliance was far more important than recovering a single prisoner. Alterac had another reason for letting Garona go. Some part of him sympathized with the half-orc and her tortured past. She had not been born an assassin. Gul'dan had made her that way. As long as she did not turn her blades against the Horde, he would let her go. Perhaps on Azeroth she would find something she'd never had on Draenor. Perhaps she would find a true home. The Elven Runestones. With much of the Alliance bogged down in the Hinterlands, Orgrim led his half of the Horde toward Quel'Thalas unopposed. En route, Soldian visited the Amani capital, Zul'Aman, to gather allies. He whipped his people into a frenzy with the promise of spilling elf blood. Thousands of trolls, adorned in enchant talismans and ritual tattoos, streamed out of Zul'Aman and took their place alongside Orgrim's horde. An army the likes of which the High Elves had not faced in thousands of years soon loomed on Quel'Thalas' borders. The marauding horde decimated the kingdom's outer holdings in short order. As Orgrim advanced north, he found that many Death Knights and Amani witch doctors were unable to wield their magics. Gul'dan eventually discovered what was dampening their powers. Thousands of years ago, after the War of the Ancients, Quel'Thalas had erected a powerful magical barrier around its kingdom. This was the Bandinorial, the Gatekeeper. The shield was tied to a series of monolithic runestones, relics that prevented the Burning Legion and other outsiders from detecting the arcane magics wielded by the High Elves. They also weakened the power of their enemies, such as the Amani trolls. Gul'dan claimed that dismantling one of these runestones would disrupt the barrier and restore the Horde's use of magic. Then he and his followers would use the relic to strengthen the Horde for the siege of Quel'Thalas. After much consideration, Doomhammer agreed to the plans. He didn't trust Gul'dan, but thus far, the warlock had proved himself useful and loyal to the Horde. Orgrim's spies in the Stormreaver clan reported no mischievous activities. What Doomhammer didn't know was that Gul'dan had won these spies to his side with threats, promises of power, and other means. Doomhammer still suspected a day would come when Gul'dan would try to betray him and take control of the Horde. He would never have imagined the truth, the Warlock was planning to abandon the Horde. In recent months, Gul'dan had nearly amassed the power to do so, though the Death Knights had not proven to be as loyal to him as he had once hoped. He had the backing of two mighty clans, the Storm Reavers and the Twilight's Hammer. Yet, that was not enough. Not nearly. The Warlock needed as much power as he could to fend off Doomhammer and any other foes he would meet on his journey to the tomb of Sargeras. Quel'Thalas' mysterious relics would give Gul'dan the strength he needed. He and his followers quickly dismantled one of Quel'Thalas' runestones. They chiseled away at the monolithic relic to build structures known as the Altars of Storms. Gul'dan then turned to the ancient ritual used by the High Mole ogres. In the distant past, they'd found a way to empower members of their own race. By channeling raw arcane magic into regular ogres, the High Mole could transform them into highly intelligent, two-headed ogre magi. Few living ogres knew of this technique, but Sho'Gull was one of them. He handpicked the brutish ogres who would undergo the transformation, and he oversaw the rituals himself. Before long, two-headed ogre magi emerged from the altars. They were just as powerful as Gul'dan had hoped they'd be. More importantly, they secretly swore their loyalty to him. Now, all that remained for Gul'dan was finding the right time to make his move. Ashes of Quel'Thalas. With the runestone desecrated, the Horde's Death Knights and other spellcasters regained their powers. Orgrim's forces stormed toward Quel'Thalas' capital, Silvermoon City. They terrorized the countryside, pillaging settlements and cutting down every elf they found. King Anastarion called on his greatest generals to stop the Horde's advance. Elf magi and rangers spread across Quel'Thalas to resist Orgrim's forces, but they did not have to fight alone for long. Tyralion and Ilaria soon arrived with half of the Alliance army. While Tyralion organized his soldiers and launched attacks against the Horde, Ilaria met with Anastarion in Silvermoon City. She urged the Elf King to pledge his forces to the Alliance, but he needed little convincing. Anastarion was furious about the Horde's assault. Not since the ancient Troll Wars had the Elves died in such numbers. Not since that terrible time had their lands been so defiled. Humans and elves had once banded together to save their respective kingdoms from oblivion. Now, they would do so again. The Alliance would have the full support and backing of Quel'Thalas. Though the Alliance and the elves were now unified in purpose, any hope that they had of a quick victory vanished in a smoke of fire. The Red Dragons had come. After months of hard work, the Dragonmore orcs had learned how to ride their winged captives in battle. Dozens of monstrous creatures appeared over Quel'Thalas. The Griffin Riders, unaccustomed to battling dragons, were forced to retreat. The orcs and their mounts then swooped down on the Alliance's armies, bathing them in gouts of flame. A firestorm enveloped the forests around Quel'Thalas, and smoke blotted out the sun. The enslaved dragons took no joy in the destruction. Far from it. Many of them wept in sorrow as they slaughtered the elves and burned alive from the wilds. The roaring firestorm caused most of the elf defenders to seek shelter in Silvermoon City. King Anastarion's people had no physical weapons that could stop the Horde and its dragons from invading the elven capital, but they had something else that could. Elf sorceresses summoned an immense shield around Silvermoon City. This barrier derived its power from the Sunwell, a fount of magic that served as the heart of Quel'Thalas' culture. For thousands of years, the elves had used its energies to construct their kingdom and protect it from outsiders. The Horde smashed against the shield again and again, but the barrier did not give away. Even the Red Dragon's mystical fire could not breach it. Orgrim's patience was wearing thin. Destroying the High Elven stronghold had never been his priority. Lordaeron's capital was. Though Orgrim had not yet satisfied the Amani Pact, he had accomplished other things in Quel'Thalas. The gifted ogre magi now served the Horde. The Dragonmore clan had finally brought the bulk of their winged servants to bear in battle. The Horde had also dealt a grave blow to Quel'Thalas, one that would take the elves many years to recover from. Orgrim began planning the next stage of his campaign. He would need a route to reach Lordaeron's capital from Quel'Thalas, one that would catch the Alliance by surprise. Alterac's betrayal. After failing to breach Silvermoon City, Orgrim pulled his forces back and ordered them to march west. The time had come to resume his campaign and attack Lordaeron's capital, and the war chief had found a way to the stronghold. The roads and valleys between Quel'Thalas and Lordaeron were the easy routes to take if one sought to reach the capital, but they were also heavily fortified. Orgrim would not take them. He would move his armies through the rugged Alterac mountains south of Lordaeron's capital, giving him the element of surprise. Not all of Doomhammer's allies agreed with his plans. Zul'jin and the Amanid rejected the war chief's call to go west. Their hatred for the elves burned so hot that they would not abandon the siege of Silvermoon. Zul'jin vowed that he would attack Lordaeron's capital only after all of Quel'Thalas was in flames and he held King Anastarion's severed head in his hands. Zul'jin's stubbornness was both infuriating and troubling. Doomhammer had relied heavily on the Amani to guide the orcs through a land that was not their own. Losing the trolls now, at this critical moment, could spell doom for the Horde. Gul'dan sensed Orgrim's mounting fears. The warlock knew that now was his chance to finally break free from the war chief's control. Gul'dan convinced Orgrim and Zul'jin that the Stormreaver clan had found a new way to destroy the barrier around Silvermoon City. All it would take was a few more days. Once the Stormreavers had succeeded, the Elven city would fall, the trolls could sate their appetite for vengeance, and then they could rejoin the Horde. Doomhammer was loath to leave more of his forces behind in Quel'Thalas, but Gul'dan's words swayed him. The Alliance was scattered. Half of its forces were in Silvermoon, and the other half still battling the Horde in the Hinterlands. Lordaeron's capital was ripe for the taking, and Doomhammer could not allow the opportunity to slip through his fingers. Doomhammer left Gul'dan and his Stormreaver clan to unravel the barrier, but he ordered the Dragonmaw to stay in Quel'Thalas and keep watch over the Warlock. If the barrier had not come down in 3 days' time, they would force Gul'dan and his followers to march west. And if Gul'dan was foolish enough to disobey, Doomhammer gave the Dragonmaw permission to feed him to their war mounts. Doomhammer led his forces west, his mind plagued by doubts. Since the landing in the Hillsbrad foothills, things had not gone according to plan, but he knew that was the way of war. Those who adapted found victory, and those who refused to change were destined for defeat. When the Horde entered the mountains, fortune smiled on Doomhammer. Alterac's king, Perenhold, was awaiting the Orcish army. He carried an offer of allegiance. From the beginning of the Second War, Perenhold had been wary of fighting the Horde. He'd believed that the orcs were an unstoppable force. His fear of the Horde had only deepened as he'd learned of the Death Knights, Red Dragons, and ogre magi in its ranks. The Horde's arrival in the Alterac mountains had finally pushed Perenhold to betrayal. Rather than fight his enemies, he would strike a deal with them. He would survive. Perenhold met the Horde to deliver a simple message. He would grant the Orcish army safe passage to the mountains, if Alterac would be spared from the Horde's wrath. Orgrim eagerly accepted the offer, and Perenhold showed the war chief how to avoid the defensive positions in the mountains. Night and day, the Horde marched through Alterac's unguarded passes. When they finally reached Crestfall Glades, Orgrim gave his forces no rest. He threw every soldier at his command against the capital city's walls. The Siege of Capital City. Terralion and his allies had long suspected that the Horde would eventually pivot west and strike at Lordaeron's capital. Their fears were confirmed when Orgrim and most of his forces suddenly pulled back from Quel'Thalas. Though some elements of the Horde's army were still rampaging through Quel'Thalas, Terralion ordered the bulk of his soldiers to move west with all due haste. With half of the Alliance army battling in the Hinterlands, the task of defending Lordaeron's capital fell to him. At first, reaching the city before Orgrim did not seem so impossible. The Horde had ventured into Alterac Mountains, and the region's defenses would slow the warchief. Then, word of King Perenhol's betrayal reached the scattered Alliance forces. No one could believe it was true. No one could fathom that any human would pledge loyalty to the bloodthirsty Horde. But it was true, and the implications were disastrous. With the Alterac Mountains fully barricaded, Doomhammer's journey west should have taken months. With a safe passage open to them, the Horde soldiers had already reached Lordaeron's capital. Terralion feared that the city would fall before he could save it, but Lordaeron was not as helpless as he believed. King Terenas commanded the capital. Though he was not a warrior, he was a man of great charisma and cunning. As Horde catapults bombarded the capital, Terenas told his people that this battle would decide the war. The future of humanity, the future of the Alliance, rested on their shoulders. Terenas himself vowed to die if it meant keeping the Horde at bay until reinforcements could arrive. Against the wishes of his advisors, he took his place on the ramparts and organized the city's defenses. Orgrim admired Lordaeron's tenacity. The humans and their king fought with a fearlessness akin to that of the orcs. Yet, it wouldn't last. Every day, Orgrim whittled away at the capital's defenses. Every day, his siege engines pounded the stronghold's crumbling walls. Once the Horde's reinforcements arrived from Quel'Thalas, the city would fall. The question was when those troops would arrive. The Dragonmaw, Stormreaver, and Twilight's Hammer clans were behind schedule, and Doomhammer had received not a word from them. Something was not right. Doomhammer felt it in his bones. His unease deepened when Terralion and his army approached from the east. Their arrival distracted the Orcish forces, giving the capital's defenders much-needed rest. Doomhammer did not fear Terralion and his forces. He feared what their appearance meant. The other Alliance armies were en route to the capital. The Horde had to breach the stronghold soon. Orgrim had the Death Knights at his disposal, but he also needed the rest of his soldiers from Quel'Thalas to secure victory. He would never get them. The Dragonmaw arrived outside Lordaeron's capital, bearing dire news. Gul'dan had betrayed the Horde. He had taken the Stormreaver and Twilight's Hammer clans with him toward the Orcish fleet anchored off Hillsbrad foothills. On the heels of his discovery, more troubling news reached Orgrim. The Alliance had learned of King Perenhol's treachery and barricaded the open passes in the Alterac Mountains. Calling on reinforcements from the Hinterlands was now out of the question. In that moment, Doomhammer knew that the war was lost. Even if his forces were able to take the capital, they would not hold it against the full strength of the Alliance. Fury burned through Doomhammer's veins. The Horde had been so close, so very close, to total victory. Now, it faced total annihilation. Orgrim called off the siege and ordered his forces into full retreat to Cosmodan. He dispatched a Dragonmaw messenger to deliver the same command to the soldiers in the Hinterlands. If the Horde could regroup, there was still a chance to put the pieces of its campaign together. It was a slim hope, but it was the only one Doomhammer had. The warchief sent the Horde's dragon riders to cover their retreat and waylay the Alliance forces as much as possible. He also sent the Blacktooth Grin clan to hunt down Gul'dan. Orgrim had spared the warlock once before. He would not make that mistake again. In search of godhood. A few days after Doomhammer marched on Lordaeron's capital, Gul'dan gathered his allies and revealed his plans to seek out the tomb of Sargeras. He promised power to all who followed him, more power than they could ever hope to gain by continuing with the Horde's pointless war. Nearly every member of the Twilight's Hammer and the Stormreaver clans pledged their support to the warlock. Yet, there were a few noticeable holdouts among the Horde in Quel'Thalas. The Amani trolls had no interest in Gul'dan's call. they continued their siege on the Elven capital. The Dragonmaw also defied the Warlock, and they moved to bar his path. In the end, neither side risked fighting. The threat of mutual annihilation was too great. The Dragonmaw set out west to rejoin the main Horde forces and warn Orgrim of what had transpired. Meanwhile, Gul'dan and his followers headed south. They met occasional resistance from humans along the way, but nothing that truly gave them pause. In Hillsbrad foothills, the renegades commandeered a portion of the Horde's fleet and sailed west. Unbeknownst to Gul'dan, the black-toothed green orcs had nearly caught up to him. They boarded the rest of the orcish vessels and followed in his wake. The black-toothed green were not the only threat to Gul'dan. Far from it. Kil'jaeden soon learned of Gul'dan's reckless betrayal, which had come as a surprise. The Warlock had hidden his intentions well from the Demon Lord. Kil'jaeden prepared to annihilate his former servant for single-handedly dooming what should have been a momentous Legion victory. Sargeras himself ordered the Demon Lord to stand down. It was not out of mercy. No, Sargeras wanted to punish the Warlock in his own way. If it was power Gul'dan wanted, then the Legion's ruler would let him find the tomb of Sargeras. He would let him come within reach of what he desired, let the foolish orc taste what could have been his. Then Sargeras would rip it all away, just as Gul'dan had done to the Horde's hope of victory. The Tomb of Sargeras. Based on the information he had gleaned from the Guardian Medivh's mind, Gul'dan plotted a course to the Tomb of Sargeras. The voyage was long and harsh. Colossal waves of fearsome storms lashed Gul'dan's fleet. It was as if nature itself were rising up to thwart the Warlock's quest. As Gul'dan neared the tomb, he could sense the godly energies emanating from within. The promise of so much power, so close at hand, consumed his every thought. The tomb of Sargeras rested at the bottom of the sea, and it would require the combined efforts of Gul'dan and his allies to lift it to the surface. The Warlock led a ritual, weaving his followers' magics into a single immense spell. The skies turned black as pitch, and the winds lashed the sea into a frenzy. Slowly, ever slowly, the tomb rose from the depths. A rocky island breached from the churning ocean. At its center was the colossal tomb of Sargeras, an imposing tower that dominated the barnacle-covered ground. Not long after the tomb of Sargeras surfaced, the black-toothed Grin approached the island. Gul'dan knew he did not have the numbers to defeat his pursuers, but if he could harness the tomb's power, he could survive. He did not know what, if any, dangers lurked within the tomb, but he had little time to prepare for them. Gul'dan ordered Sho'gul and the Twilight's Hammer to hold off their enemies while he took the Stormreaver clan into the structure. As the Warlock and his adherents hurried through the tomb's shadowy corridors, they eventually discovered that they were not alone. Long ago, when Aegwynn had transported Sargeras' avatar into the tomb, she had also imprisoned a number of his demon followers at the site. Most of these creatures were dead, or barely clinging to life. The Guardian had believed that the tomb's enchanted seals would keep them contained. That much was true. The demons would never have been able to escape the structure on their own. Yet, over the millennia, some of them had fed on the Avatar's lingering power, regaining enough strength to prowl the tomb. At Sargeras' command, the creatures leapt from the shadows to tear Gul'dan's followers apart. Then they turned their wrath on the Warlock and flayed him alive, ripping the flesh and muscle from his bones. For a brief moment, his screams of agony shook the tomb. Then, there was only silence. Only a few of Gul'dan's Stormreaver adherents survived the encounter with the demons. Before fleeing from the tomb, they recovered their master's head, believing that it held great power. Outside, the Twilight's Hammer fought for their own survival. Led by Dalrand and Maim Blackhand, the Black-Toothed Grin cut down the betrayers and left their bodies to rot in the tomb's shadow. Shogal suffered grave wounds in the fight. He survived only due to the Twilight's Hammer followers. A few members of the clan took the wounded ogre aboard a ship and set sail from the tomb. The winds carried the vessel west into uncharted waters. With vengeance served, the Black-Toothed Grin orcs boarded their ships and sailed east. As proof of their victory, they retrieved Gul'dan's skull from one of the warlock's followers. The orc who had sold his race into demonic servitude was no more. The liberation of Cosmodan. Far from the tomb of Sargeras, the Horde continued its desperate retreat to Cosmodan. The Orcish army in the Hinterlands fought through Lothar's forces and raced toward Thandalspan. Orgrim and his half of the Horde followed close behind. Lothar and Terraleon soon rallied, recombining their armies and storming after the retreating Horde. With his fleet gone, Orgrim had little choice but to retreat on foot. Long weeks of hard marching and sporadic battles with the Alliance had taken their toll on the Orcish armies. Before long, Orgrim and the remnants of the Horde limped into Cosmodan, pushing through the wetlands into the colder, mountainous parts of the region. En route to the Dwarven homeland, Orgrim had dispatched dragon riders to look for the Black-Toothed Grin and learn what had become of them. Some of these scouts returned with news. They had spotted the Black-Toothed Grin sailing back toward Cosmodan. The orc sailors had told the dragon riders of Gul'dan's demise. Orgrim took pleasure in this development. If nothing else, at least the treacherous warlock would never again manipulate the orc race. Orgrim only wished he'd be the one to deliver the killing blow. Yet, the satisfaction of Gul'dan's death faded as Orgrim took stock of his forces. The war had annihilated over half of his armies. With the Black-Toothed Grin still at sea, he had no navy. The Horde would not find victory in its current state. It wouldn't even be able to hold Cosmodan against the Alliance, especially if the dwarves and the gnomes joined the fight. Orgrim dispatched a messenger to gather reinforcements from Draenor. Whether or not the bloodthirsty clans there were ready to fight mattered little. He needed them now. Then he ordered his soldiers to gather in Blackrock Spire, where they could wait until the reinforcements arrived. Blackrock Spire was deep in Horde-controlled territory. If the Alliance chose to pursue, Doomhammer would make them pay for every step. He told Chieftain Kilrog and his Bleeding Hollow to remain in Cosmodan. Throughout the Second War, they had kept the dwarves and the gnomes confined in their mountain cities. Now, they would have an even greater role. They would delay the Alliance army and prevent it from smashing into the Horde's rearguard. Doomhammer gathered Chieftain Zulahad and as many able-bodied warriors from the Dragonmaw as he could. The Dragon Riders were still scattered across Lordaeron, but Orgrim knew that they were too valuable a weapon to simply abandon. He ordered Necros to rally the remaining beasts of war at Grim Batol and then transport them, Alexstrasza, and the rest of his resources to Blackrock Spire. Orgrim also commanded the orc to send some of the Dragon Riders to seek out the Black-Toothed Grin, inform them of the Horde's new rendezvous point, and guard their ships from any Alliance naval forces. Lothar knew that the Horde was wounded. One swift and merciless strike was all it would take to shatter the Orcish army forever. Though the Alliance soldiers were fatigued from months of battle, Lothar pushed them onward. This was their chance to end the war. The Alliance's swift march south would have never been possible without Terraleon and the other paladins. The holy warriors worked day and night, mending the wounded and filling their hearts with resolve and courage. The Alliance soldiers poured into Cosmodan and made short work of the Bleeding Hollow. The paladins led hunting parties to root out the orcs and drive them from the region. In defeating the Bleeding Hollow, the Alliance also liberated Ironforge and Gnomeregan. The Bronzebeard dwarves and the gnomes emerged from their mountain strongholds jubilant and eager for retribution. Both peoples pledged their forces to the Alliance. They will lend their hammers, axes, and technologies to the war effort. For the first time in the war, nearly every noble race in the Eastern Kingdoms was united. Battle of Crestfall. Northwest of Casmodan, the Black-Toothed Grin continued their sea voyage. Dragon riders sent by Necros had found the vessels and delivered word of the Horde's retreat to Blackrock Spire. Dal Rend and Maim ordered the Black-Toothed Grin to alter course and sail to Stormwind, which was still under Horde control. From there, the orcs would travel to Blackrock Spire by land. Yet, if Dal Rend and Maim were hoping for an easy passage south, they wouldn't find it. Admiral Proudmoore was patrolling the waters. Near the island of Crestfall, the Alliance Navy overtook the Horde fleet. Just as the battle near Zul'Dare, Proudmoore outmaneuvered his foes and hammered them with cannon fire. And just as before, the Horde had dragons. The beasts swooped down from the skies and engulfed the Alliance ships in sheets of fire. This time, Proudmoore did not retreat. Wildhammer Griffin riders had arrived to support his fleet. After being defeated by dragons in Quel'Thalas, the dwarves had learned new tactics. They used the Griffin's mobility and speed to their advantage, outmaneuvering their larger foes and drawing their attention away from the Alliance boats. Lightning-infused storm hammers and dragon flames set the heaven alight, while cannon fire painted the waves red. Dal Rend and Maim's ship and a few other vessels escaped the battle intact, but most of the Horde's fleet was sunk by Proudmoore's superior forces. The dragon riders scattered in all directions, fleeing before the wrath of the fearless Griffin riders. The Alliance had won a decisive victory at sea and destroyed the Horde's navy, but the cost had been great. The Red Dragons had decimated Proudmoore's own ships. Many brave sailors had died, including the Admiral's son. Proudmoore would never forget his child's death, and his hatred of the orcs would fester like an open wound until the end of his days. The Siege of Blackrock Spire. From Blackrock Spire, Doomhammer watched the Alliance army wind into the burning steppes like a serpent of silver and gold. Thousands of Alliance soldiers arranged themselves around the Horde stronghold. And then they began the relentless siege. The fortress's gates would hold, but not for long enough. The dragon riders from Grim Batol hadn't arrived yet, and neither had the Black-Toothed Grin clan or the reinforcements from Draenor. They would never get there in time. Despair took root in Doomhammer's heart, but it crushed it down the moment it reared its head. He would not give in. Not now. Not ever. This war was about more than glory, about more than him. It was about restoring honor to his race and ensuring its survival. Doomhammer had only two choices, the same two he'd always had: secure a home on Azeroth, or return to Draenor and die. If death was his fate, he would die in honorable combat, not by hunger or disease. In the fortress of Blackrock Spire, he stoked the fires of the Horde's bloodlust. He called on his forces for one last charge, one final battle to decide their destiny. They were an unstoppable Horde. They had conquered the Draenei, Stormwind, and many other foes. This world called Azeroth was theirs for the taking, and the Alliance would not stand in their way. As the Alliance siege engines hammered at the mountain, the metal gate suddenly yawned wide. Thousands of howling soldiers spilled from the stronghold. Orgrim himself led the Horde's assault. He was under no illusion that he could defeat the Alliance by force. Instead, he cut a path toward Lothar. Doomhammer had learned of the human culture in recent years. Much like the orcs, the humans revered and idolized their leaders. Killing a chieftain could often break the will and resolve of an orc clan. Doomhammer hoped that striking down Lothar would have the same effect on the Alliance. The Horde's suicidal charge caught the Alliance off guard. Doomhammer stormed through the siege lines and launched himself at Lothar. The Supreme Commander did not flee. He met Doomhammer in single combat, just as any honorable warrior would. A hush fell over the Horde and the Alliance soldiers near Doomhammer and Lothar. The crash of sword against hammer rang out across the burning steppes. Neither warrior gave ground, not at first, but Orgrim was simply mightier than his opponent. The warchief shattered Lothar's great sword with a swing of his warhammer. The Alliance commander fell to his knees. With his next merciless blow, Doomhammer crushed Lothar's skull. Watching their warchief vanquish the enemy commander inspired the orcs, and they pressed their attack. Orgrim's gambit had paid off. He could see the sorrow and despair in his enemy's eyes. The Alliance soldiers were flagging. Many of them were losing their will to fight. Yet, Turalyon did not give in to sorrow or despair. Such feelings were of no use to him. They would not bring Lothar back. They would not avenge his fallen friend. The young paladin unleashed his holy powers. The lightning radiated out from Turalyon, blinding all around him, including Orgrim, and bringing the fighting to a standstill. The paladin took up Lothar's broken blade and knocked the stunning orc warchief unconscious. He then called on his allies to stand tall in this dark hour, just as Lothar would have. Through every trial the Alliance had faced, their commander had never hesitated. He had led them with wisdom and bravery. He had treated them as more than soldiers, as friends and family. They were all Lothar's sons and daughters, and they would carry on his dream of ridding the world of the Horde. Now was not the time for uncertainty, not when victory was within reach. Now was the time to fight. For Azeroth, for the Alliance, for Lothar! Hope burned bright in every Alliance soldier who heard Turalyon that day. With a final battle cry, the paladin rallied his comrades. The Alliance crashed into the Horde, and orcish armies buckled from the onslaught. Some fled north, east, or west. Others raced south toward the dark portal. A brave few continued fighting outside Blackrock Spire, hoping for death in battle. They would not find it. Turalyon and the other paladins overwhelmed these soldiers, but they did not put them to the blade. They bound them, along with their warchief, in chains. Destruction of the Dark Portal. Led by Terran Gorefiend and his Death Knights, some of the Horde escaped the Alliance and fled toward the Dark Portal. Reaching the safety of their homeworld was the only hope of survival. Turalyon and the Alliance hounded their every step, the memory of Lothar's death still raw and painful. They were eager for vengeance, but just as eager to track the Horde to the Dark Portal. Little was known about the gateway, or its exact location, and Turalyon hoped that the retreating orcs and Death Knights would lead them to it. They did. Outside the Dark Portal, in the Black Morass, the Alliance overtook the Horde. The battle that unfolded was one of the most brutal and desperate fought in the Second War. Gorefiend and his Death Knights called upon the fury and terror of the necromantic arts. They would not defeat Turalyon's forces, but it was enough to allow the Horde to slip through the portal. Turalyon did not pursue the Horde. He had already pushed his soldiers to the breaking point, and he did not know what horrors awaited them on the other side. There was only one thing left to do: destroy the Dark Portal and prevent the Horde from ever returning. For this, Turalyon called on Khadgar and his fellow magi. The sorceresses gathered around the looming gateway and began a great spell. Khadgar led the other magi as they unraveled the portal, pulling apart each ethereal thread until the rift slammed shut. The backlash of energy shattered the portal's stone frame in a blinding explosion of arcane light. The Dark Portal, which had brought so much ruin to Azeroth, crumbled to dust. A roar of approval sounded through the Alliance lines. The soldiers, who had fought so hard, who had seen their friends and loved one die, fell to their knees in celebration. Many wept tears of joy. The war was over. The Alliance had won.